Hello everyone, this is Titus from cgcookie.com here to bring you part 3 of gun concept design for production. In this tutorial, we will be polishing our refined silhouettes from part 2 to achieve a detailed final concept. Let's get started. Before we begin, I wanted to talk a little bit about the setup I use before I actually start my final. I changed the background from a white pure background to more of a gradient grayscale background just so that I can see some of the highlights on the top of the gun. The light source will be coming from the top, pointing downwards, so it's important to try and show where that light source is coming, and it just helps just to see that highlight, that pure white highlight where it gets really hot on the gun. I also went in with a polygonal lasso tool and I grabbed a couple chunks around the gun and I increased the brightness of it by going into the hue saturation, also by clicking Control U or Command U, I believe it is on the Macs, just because I wanted to try and block in some of the palette I really wanted, or what I want. And the whole idea about it was that I wanted to make it more of a white gun rather than the traditional gunmetal, and hopefully this will try and achieve more of a sci-fi gun. So right now I'm just going to grab the color that I already have in this trigger area, and I'm just going to start blocking in a little bit of the initial silhouette just to make it a little bit more cleaner. Right now I created a new layer and made it into color dodge, and I just grabbed that gray around the gun to make these little screws, I guess you could call them, white. It's kind of tough to use the polygon and lasso tool for circle shapes, so using just the hard round brush achieves that quicker. And again, you will notice that with any of these kind of paintings, whenever you spend a lot of time on them, the technique is always the same. It's just that it's a repetitious way of achieving the final. There's no real quick, easy way to do this. This is all part of the process, and it becomes really repetitive and boring, but it's really required to create a rock star concept. I'm just grabbing a couple of these little divots again, trying to fill up some areas. Now that I'm zoomed in more, I get to see where places can maybe benefit and like try and test out some sort of functions. It is good to zoom out once in a while though, once you do make these changes, as you may see me do that quite a bit. This is just so I can see how the gun works in general, and try and make some changes if I'm not satisfied with it. That color dodge layer that I had before, I just collapsed it onto the main layer. A lot of people like to work with a bunch of layers. I prefer more of a traditional, one layer kind of a deal where I can actually erase with color, or in this case it's all grayscale for now. And it's important to work in grayscale, at least with my technique, because it helps establish the values first, and there are a bunch of coloring techniques that you can use with layer modes to try and color it later on. Right here I'm just trying to make an interesting shape that I can probably duplicate around. These little additions kind of help with the overall design of this gun, and they're pretty quick and fairly easy to make too. So, and the nice thing is you can duplicate these on its own layer and then set it as its own master, and you can just duplicate it again when you want to use it and then just put it wherever you want. Right here I'm just adding in some highlights and some shadows, just really rough lighting. It's definitely not realistic in any sense, but it definitely helps just to kind of put it in there to make things pop a little bit so you can get an understanding of the form of this gun. And it also helps to kind of give the gun more dynamic. If I didn't add any of those lights in there, it would seem like the gun is just a pancake. But adding these little values in here make it more machined as well too, because like I said before, you want to try and make sure that this gun looks like it's machined and it's put together rather than it being molded into one piece. That just helps with the realistic portion of it. When I was initially changing the color of the gun, a lot of the line work did lighten up as well, and in essence, they kind of were hard to see. So I'm just going back in there and tidying it up a little bit. And even though the silhouette portion of it was to block out most of the design of the gun, there are still chances that I can, in this final, kind of explore a little bit more of the overall gun design since I am zoomed in and I'm paying a little bit more attention on details. Now I can finally start focusing on making it look better than the original. And the PSD for this will be available. I think it will be available for citizen users. I definitely strongly urge you guys to really take benefit of becoming a citizen, mainly because the price for it is very cheap for what you get. If you think about how much actual classes for college costs, this definitely helps. Just to get a little bit of idea, different techniques that you may experience. Just adding more ammo to your arsenal, really, and just exploring new ideas. Maybe it's something that will help you in the long run. Uh, Maybe it's not. At the end of the day, $10 for a month is a great buy. So I'm going back in here, changing a little bit of this gun. I made that portion a little taller just to break up that silhouette, make it a little bit more uh, defined, and also giving it a little bit more dynamic structure to it. That just helps with making it a little bit more interesting. I know it seems like a lot of these additions they seem pretty moot at first, but in the long run, once you see everything come together, it definitely helps. It really does. And this portion took 2.5 hours to complete. I know that's always like a big thing with a beginning artist is how long something takes. I know initially in part 1 and 2, I think I said that this whole thing took 3 hours, and I guess I was wrong because this part took 2.5, and it's condensed down to 30 minutes. But nonetheless, this is still pretty fairly or quick for a concept of a gun. I'm just adding a little bit more detail in here. I saw that it was a huge negative space, and also that it may be seen as part of the gun since it is white. The background is white and the majority of the gun is white, so it may seem that that little negative space is part of the gun, and I didn't want that to be apparent. So I'm just adding a little bit of stuff in there. And those U designs that I made first, right now you can see I'm just grabbing them around and duplicating them. Again, you can duplicate layers quickly by hitting Control J, and that way you don't have to right click and hit duplicate layer. These little additions are just repetition or repetitive shapes that I had. I used them once, and same with those little circular rivets. Using them multiple times definitely helps with the overall design. You always want to try and keep everything consistent. Right here I'm just screwing around with some brushes. You can find these brushes available on the download option of the Citizen. I use a lot of brushes sometimes for mainly to try and cheat my way out of creating some repetitive shapes. I don't normally use them in essence to add texture to weapons. I really don't like using textures a lot. I usually use photos for that mainly. I don't necessarily use a brush, but that depends on the style that I'm going for, and depending on what company you're working for. Some people want more line work versus just pure painterly strokes. Some companies maybe just want really loose, crazy concepts, and I find that that changes depending on location. I think people in the Midwest and Chicago, where I'm from, the companies here kind of expect more rounded artists. So you'll see concept artists, changing their style quite frequently. Over here, I'm just adding some yellow stripes. Wasn't too happy with that one, but it'll come back eventually. It's just a little trick I like to use because this gun is, as of now, it's grayscale, and I want it to be a white gun, but adding some color in there will make it more apparent that it is white versus it being a grayscale drawing. So it just helps kind of cheat that so that point comes across easier. Adding a little bit more details on this bottom part just to make it look a little bit more interesting. Um, I know a question popped up on the forums, or not the forums, the discussion board for part 2, I believe. And it's how I work, and I work with an Intuos 4 Wacom tablet medium, and I know the question arose, how do I work with it? And it's an interesting question. I've never really had anyone ask me that, but it's definitely important now that I think about it. The way I work with the Wacom tablet is I have it on my lap, and I have the keyboard rows above my actual slide out keyboard. So I have quite a bit of room to work with. It's definitely not ergonomical in any way. That's kind of the price you pay with these Wacom tablets. You need a lot of space if you want to work it on level with the keyboard, especially if you're working with a medium-sized tablet or anything larger than that. But having it on the lap gives me more control with my brush strokes, and I can actually use my shoulder sometimes or my elbow to get more broad strokes and not really focus mainly on using my wrist, which is not a good thing to do, really. You really want to follow through with your strokes, especially if it's for characters. You can see me panning around. I'm trying to find something. I'm finding mistakes. I'm trying to find something to do. I'm trying to find things to enhance, throwing in some highlights here and there, finding places that I've missed for shadows. This is all, the final really takes is really cleaning it up, making it look very presentable, and trying to achieve pristine condition. And changing that little chunk over there to white gives it more of a sense that it's bent inwards, and it just gives it more dynamic to it. You'll see that I'll start doing that more throughout the gun. I'm trying to find places to make it more interesting. And that's the thing you really want to focus on when you're working on the finals. You want to try and find a way to make it look more interesting, because the silhouette, in essence, has no values, well, at least the ones that I worked from. And when you have the final ready to go, it's I believe it's easier to find areas and sections that you can make it look a lot more interesting. And that's mainly because of the construction lines that you have laying around, and it kind of gives a sense that this should be built this way, depending on what you see. Changing the scope a little bit, kind of looked weird. I wanted it to make a little bit more mainstream, but also just to kind of give it more room to where you can see the lens. And I have that layer set to preserve transparency, so it only affects that layer for the lens, and that's how I got those highlights and shadows in onto it. I use a combination of both the lasso tool and the polygonal lasso tool. I use the lasso tool mainly because if it's a small chunk that I want to try and select, it's a lot easier. The polygonal lasso tool gets frustrating sometimes when you're making more complex selections, because you can easily screw up. But if you hit the delete key when you are making a transformation, or when you're making a selection with the polygonal lasso tool, it will delete the last click that you made with it. So it's definitely very helpful with it, so you don't have to keep going back and forth and starting over like I used to with it, and it's definitely helpful for sure. I neglected this back part a little bit, so going back in there, trying to make it a little bit more interesting. And there's that awesome design from before that I'm using again. Power of threes, as you can see. And adding just like little details like that, it never hurts. It just helps break up some of that repetitive, boring, same line quality stroke that was on that part. And it just makes it a little bit more interesting. That's really all this is. And I know it comes up a lot. You know, how do I become a better artist? You know, and it's all really time. The more time you spend on something, and the more you actually care for something, is the more that it'll end up being better. And yes, I am using a texture brush. I was kind of a hypocrite, but I use it very rarely. And this is just to show that this buttstock is made of a different material. It's made of more of like a soft plastic look. And that brush will be available to download as well. And also changing the color of that brush to more of a white gives it some more highlights and specular. Just grabbing that bottom part to add that texture on there as well. And I noticed that those little dots back down there were pretty cool, so I went in with the hard circle brush and changed the spacing on it and made the size really small, and I started adding a bunch of it everywhere. This is where I changed my brush to linear dodge. If you hold shift and right click when you have your brush selected, you can easily go to the mode for that brush, and that's just to give it some highlights and some form onto that barrel. It's important to notice that the light of it, or the highlight, is in the middle of the barrel, and I usually add some stroke on the top. Again, just duplicating some existing shapes. You know, maybe, hey, let's grab this chunk, let's see how that works. And it's mainly because I like that little white line in there, in between the black. I don't know why, it's really cool. As you can see, I added another white one insetted in that white one. And it just gives it more depth and interest. You know, maybe that can be a little button for the scope that toggles between night vision and thermal vision. Setting that little layer to preserve transparency allowed me to give it some drop shadow, so that it seemed like it was more inside of the scope than it actually seemed to be. Another boring little thing you have to do, you know, adding some value to these little heat dispersers. And you can, if you notice, working on a pretty small brush at this point, and the way how I usually illustrate how workflow works, that doesn't make sense, how workflow in general works for me, is that I start out with a big brush, i.e. the silhouette, and then I transition to a smaller brush as I go along, which is the final. And this is what I tell a lot of people how I work, and it's an easy way to stay on track, stay focused, and pay attention to what's important. And the beginning stages is usually the design and the silhouette. Here I'm going in with the polygonal lasso tool, darkening up edges, lighting up edges. This will make it seem that it's more beveled. And just like that, you know, I transform the silhouette. Well, the silhouette on a different angle of view, but makes it more interesting. And creating new layers and putting it behind your final allows you to erase with no fear. I use that quite a bit, and then merging them down together to get them all in one layer. This is where I start thinking about the functionality of the gun a little bit more. I know this bottom part right here is where I want the gun to load its shells. So I'm making some sort of contraption to where you will slide this little part forward, and it will release the hatch below to where you can load another magazine into. And this just helps, again, to kind of give the gun more of a realistic sense to it. Finding a little places, nitpicking a lot. That's usually what a final is. It's a bunch of, you know, perfectionists' ideology, really. It's a curse and a gift to be a perfectionist. You know, in production and working in a studio, being a perfectionist sometimes helps. Um, you know, depending if you're making a concept for the main character of a game, you really want to try and bring your all and really brand uh, the design of this character so it can be successful in this game and very notable, so that when people look at it in the future, they'll say, "Oh, that's from such and such game," and you know that you took part in that kind of a branding state. Uh, Whereas perfectionism can kind of hurt you if there's such, you know, if there's a milestone coming up. And a milestone is basically just a date given by publishers to where they want to see certain things done, and you have to show them, you know, what you have done so far on this on a video game, so they can try and uh, understand how much more development time is needed, or if they should give more money and they think it's worth, you know, giving a AAA title or giving it a AAA budget. Um, but times like that, when you know there's a milestone coming around, being a perfectionist is sometimes not that great because you spend more time than you should be, um, and that's where it kind of hurts the team a little bit. You'll be surprised how much concept art is very important in a game studio. You know, the 3D modeler is looking at you, making sure, you know, or relying on you, and the game designers are you know, looking up at your stuff and making sure that it's all fitting within the story. You know, you have your art director, and different studios have their different ways of illustrating their roles, but usually the 3D modeler is the one that's very dependent on the concept artist. But sometimes the 3D modeler usually has more freedom than most studios, where they just need some sort of concept art just to get an idea of how it should look, and the art team usually gives them or trusts them enough to where they can, you know, kind of understand that they know how to make stuff look cool, essentially. Just adding in some drop shadows here and there, making it pop a little bit more. Stuff like that is not that necessary, I think, but it's so quick and easy to make, and it really just helps to prove where the concept is going and what's going on within the gun. So definitely doesn't hurt to do that. Helps more than not. Just grabbing the texture and adding it to this addition that I made down here, just so it shares that same texture, and you kind of get the sense that it's that same material from the buttstock. And right there, it got a little hot on the highlight, so I added a little bit of a gray in there. Not so much to where it seems like an outline, but it's something to kind of help not make it get lost into the background. Naming some of my layers. I'm pretty bad at that, mainly because I usually do work in one layer. But for production, I usually make sure I do that. Here I have a custom brush I made. It's just a square that has rotation onto it, a little bit of scatter, and it has wet edges onto it. And the wet edges will give it a little bit of a stroke look to it, which will help make it seem like it's an actual scratch, and uh, just helps really to add in detail very cheaply and quickly. And don't slap this around anywhere. You have to kind of look at the gun and look at where. Mainly, I go off of where there are rivets, and where there are corners of the gun. That's usually where I put these scratches in here. The rivets are mainly because, if the gun shoots off, the gun has a lot of energy that's going through it, and these rivets are the things that are holding it in, and, they may move a little bit at a time over the years and may chip a little bit of paint off, may wear down the local areas around it. And it could just be that depending on how much height these rivets are displaced from the actual gun itself will determine the contact point of this, if it was to say, dropped from a set of stairs or not. I'm adding a little bit of value over here to try and give this buttstock a little bit more form. But as you can see, I quit. I said, no, that's not working. So let's forget about it. This is a trick I like to do a lot. I have a layer set to linear dodge, and I pulled off a soft brush, and I started brushing around the gun on its edges and within, and it gives it this this light that kind of bleeds through. It gives it, it's kind of like a rim light, that a soft rim light that bends around the form of the gun. It looks cool. That's all it really is. It's nothing big. It's not like it's actually making or breaking the gun design. Again, it's something quick and easy to do that just makes the gun look better and presentable. Took some orange or yellow, cut some parts out. I used that square brush again for the scratches, just to make it seem like it's paint. And then using just a blocky font, making some sort of model number. This is where I kind of make a logo, just from a circle, really. And then I named it Zionic. If you are working for companies, usually they will have a legal team that's in charge of, making sure nothing isn't being infringed on. But it's also important as a concept artist to really take the time to, for instance, Google Zionic, see if anything comes up, because you don't want to have that extra work and dev time that you could have done, in 5 minutes, or not even 5 minutes. So adding more of this yellow stuff. I noticed that I nudged that little layer off, so I'm just going to move it back in. And I noticed that it was a little too jarring, all that yellow down there, when I zoomed out. The Far Reach PP1 scope. I don't know where I come up with these names. It's just something random that I make up. Far Reach sounds cool if it's an object, I guess. That's all it really is. It's nothing important. Adding more of that yellow. Notice how I'm not trying to go more towards the barrel of the gun. That part's not really in need of the yellow. Adding in this red stuff, just to kind of give it a sense that, this could be the safety button. And I made a new layer called Beauty Lights. I set it to, well, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to set it to. Linear dodge, and I took the gradient tool and used, I think it's called the linear gradient tool, where it just makes a bar from the middle, and it makes a gradient on both sides of that bar. It's just an easy way of adding in some lights into there for these guns. I do this a lot. This is just, again, as the title of that layer says it, beauty lights. It's just beauty. It's really, there's no function to it, really. But you can use it to your benefit, though, because I do have a 1-point light, essentially, but it's very blown out, so the whole gun is lit. But I can use these beauty lights as maybe a second point of a light system. And to get rid of a bunch of that stuff on the outside, I just went back to my main gun layer, used the lasso or used the magic wand tool, selected outside of the gun, and then went back to the beauty lights layer and then hit delete to delete all the extra stuff that wasn't actually touching the gun. It was making an effect onto the gradient background though, so that's why I got rid of that. I didn't want to make it too cluttery. It's really simple techniques. And you can apply this really for anything, characters, environments too. Uh, Making a new layer for beauty lights just to kind of like throw in some sort of atmosphere, throw in some sort of, off-camera lighting that is going into frame, stuff like that. Again, I selected the outside of the gun to kind of clean it up. You can tell like it it looks fairly realistic-ish, and that's mainly that's my style really, is making things look realistic and using these techniques with the texture brush for the scratches, for the buttstock, adding in logos to the gun, naming the gun, naming the scope, putting in these beauty lights. It all helps. And that concludes this tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It's been a blast. I definitely had fun making this gun. If you guys have any questions, please just leave a comment. I will try my best to get back to them. And definitely show your work. I really want to see your guys' stuff. And if you guys ever need critiques, definitely message me and I will try and help out as much as I can. Thanks.